the topic of this webinar is a technical webinar, and we'll be talking about the role of backups in cybersecurity frameworks and cyber insurance in Australia. So we'll be focusing on the Australian scene. Okay, so in the agenda, I'll be going through the Essential 8, so the ASD's ACSC Essential 8 and backups, or the role that backups play in it. I'll be going through the NIST cybersecurity framework, and again, how backup plays a role there. And lastly, I'll be going through the cyber insurance and the role that backup plays there. And I'll try to link them as Alison mentioned there. So firstly, going through the ACSC Essential 8 and backups. So what is the Essential 8? The Essential 8, you would have heard, I'm sure, is a set of 8 cyber risk mitigation strategies. They are published by the Australian Signals Directorate's Australian Cyber Security Centre. So it's a very long name. So therefore, the acronym there, and again, hopefully you're familiar with the ASD and the ACSC. Now, the Essential 8 is publicly available, so it's free. It does define 4 maturity levels in its maturity model. So the levels being 0 to 3. 0 is actually effectively that you haven't met any of those criteria. The higher you go in terms of maturity level, helps you prevent more complex cyber attack. And hopefully become clear as I go through one of the, I guess, a set of those controls in detail very soon. Now, the ACSC also publishes an assessment guide for the Essential 8, and it talks about, it basically helps organizations assess where they are in terms of the maturity level. And lastly, the Essential 8 is voluntary. It's not mandatory for anyone really right now, but there are a lot of talk, and it is likely to become mandatory for government agencies. Okay, so what are the actual strategies we're talking about? What are the 8 strategies that I mentioned before? I won't go through them. I'll list it here for you. Because today we'll be focusing on the very last one there, which is in bold, regular backups. So as you can see, there's quite a few, and they hopefully make sense to you, and you can access this and read more about them. But today I'll focus on the regular backups. But one thing I will say is that each one of those strategy defines a set of practical controls, right, to help you achieve different level of maturity according to maturity model, as I mentioned before. And on the following slides, I'll be going through 11 of those controls that relate to regular backups. So I guess, hold on, we're going to dive straight into the actual controls. Now, thing about these controls is that I have grouped them here based on where they require for different maturity levels. So the first 6 controls I'll be presenting here, I'll be going through, relate to all maturity levels, so 1, 2, and 3. So it's basically they're the minimum things you need to cover in order to meet the minimum maturity level. Now, the control number 1 is really all about making sure that you have planned your backups properly. In fact, it's quite a wide-ranging control compared to some of the later controls, which is quite narrow focus. This one basically saying that you make sure that you have your backups perform according to your business criticality and business continuity requirements. Right. So what that means practically is that classify your data and determine your RPO and your RTO, right? Your restore point objective and your restore time objective. For example, determine where your business critical data are kept, how fast you need to recover your files, how often do you want to back up, or how often do you need to do your backups, and how far back do you need to keep them. So this is, I guess, really the bread and butter when it comes to backup planning. Now, as you see, as I go to the next set of controls, they become a bit more and more narrow focus. So that one control does cover a lot. The next control here, control 2, is about making sure that your backups, so the files within your backups, are synchronized time-wise. That there's, they're all taken within at a common point in time, so that you can carry out restoration. Again, this affects maturity levels 1, 2, and 3. So why is this even important? This is because there are many applications, for example, databases, that need all related files that are being restored to be synchronized to a common point in time for them to work. If they're not synchronized to a common point in time, then there's a chance that your database would be corrupted. So they're not usable effectively once you restore them. So what that means is that your backup solution must back up from a point in time snapshot. For example, a VSS snapshot, if you're familiar with that. So for example, if you have 1,000 files and it takes you an hour to do a backup, or an hour specifically to copy them from one location to another, if you simply do a file copy, not a proper backup using snapshots, then what will happen is that your first backup, your first file and your 1,000th file, your last file, are likely to have a timestamp that are 1 hour different to each other, because it took 1 hour to do the backup. So to do the copy. So that's why simply copying the files will not achieve this requirement. Okay, so and now moving on to control number 3. Control number 3 is about making sure that your backups are kept or retained in a secure and resilient manner. Again, this as I mentioned before, controls 1 to 6 are required for maturity levels 1, 2, and 3. So what does this mean practically? Well, it's the kind of questions you want to ask is, where are you saving your backups, and do you have them offsite and offline? Now, this comes up a lot everywhere in terms of cybersecurity frameworks, and in terms of insurance, cyber insurance questions. So offsite and offline backups is something that you definitely want to consider as part of your achieving these controls. You also want to consider how reliable the backup process is and the backup storage. So, for example, are you connecting to the internet in order to do the backup, and how reliable that connection is? Are you using a storage media that is known to fail quite a bit? If so, then how are you mitigating that? For example, it is known that external hard drive, there's a good chance that if you have 10 disks, you have more than one that will fail, within a year. So the other question you want to consider is, how fast can you access your backups when you need them? And are backups encrypted at rest and in transit? So, are they encrypted before they're sent to the cloud, or are they, yes, so that you effectively achieve zero encryption, zero knowledge encryption. Okay, I will now move on to control number 4. I do have a quick pause here, just a quick sound check. Alison or anyone else, please give me a quick response that everything's fine. Yep.
Can hear, and slides are good. Yeah.
Perfect.
All good.
Okay. So in terms of control number 4, it is about making sure that you've tested your backup as part of not the important part, which is that this is part of a disaster recovery exercise. The ACSC stresses the importance of a full disaster recovery exercise, not just testing a file, not testing your file restore process. So effectively, the whole disaster recovery exercise, and the most effective backup to help you with this is a system image backup, because with the system image backup, you can carry out a bare metal recovery. So with the file only backup, you can't do that. So therefore, that's what we recommend you use. Now, in terms of business continuity, there are some solutions, some backup solutions that you can that can help you boot directly from your backups. Now, that basically means that if you're in a situation where you need to you have lost control of your system, for example, if you're have a bad update, software update, like the situation with CrowdStrike, when you're in that situation and you have to come back up quickly, you can, in some cases, be able to use your backup and boot directly to it and come back up, within minutes. Have a system effectively running within minutes. Of course, at that point, back at the backup point in time. The last point here is that although the ACSC mandates you to do a yearly disaster recovery exercise, we do highly recommend, and so does I guess most other experts as well, recommend that you do your backup testing more frequently than that, and ideally with an automated process. Okay, so from here onwards, I've gone through 4 controls, and those 4 controls really are covers a lot about just the backups, about carrying the backups, securing, making sure your backups, where they're kept, and the kind of device that you're, whether they're secured and so forth. Now, from here onwards, the next 7 controls are all about access, about controlling access to your backups. So as you go up the maturity levels, it's about preventing, I guess, unwanted access that is carried out in a more sophisticated cyber attack. So let me explain as I go through it. So control number 5, we're talking about unprivileged accounts. Now, what does that mean? Unprivileged accounts are effectively standard accounts that don't have administrative rights. So we're talking about unprivileged accounts cannot have access to backups belonging to other accounts. Right. So again, this is part of maturity levels 1, 2, and 3. And from practical considerations, that means that you want to have security group settings that prevent access to backups belonging to other users. That might sound like, okay, that's simple enough, but of course you got to think of it not just from your AD perspective. For example, in a NAS situation, you also want to check that your permissions are set properly, your firewall rules there are also configured properly. You might want to consider IP address filtering, for example. For cloud backups, you also want to make sure that your storage access credentials are safely kept. Right? If that someone can access that, then they effectively can access your backups as well. So that's someone else's backups, that is. Now, as we go into the next set of controls, you'll see that we're talking about more and more sophisticated, possible sophisticated attacks. So for maturity level 1, they're still relatively simple. So unprivileged accounts, for control number 6, we're talking about unprivileged accounts are prevented from modifying and deleting backups. So that makes sense, right? You want to make sure that if an account is compromised, that they cannot even delete their own backups, right? Or at least the backup of the accounts that they've compromised, that is being compromised. So we're talking about, again, having the right access controls, but on top of that, you want to make sure that your backup configurations and your storage credentials, as mentioned before, are protected. So for example, your backup configurations, you want to make sure that only administrators can have access to your backup application or be able to run backup application, because if somebody can edit your backup configurations, they can effectively delete your backups. A simple case, for example, let's say you set up your backup to keep 30 copies, so one a day, so it's a month of backups. But if I guess a hacker comes in and they change the configuration to save only one backup, they encrypt all your files and then run the backup, you effectively lost all your backups. Okay, and the last point there is that you should also consider using backup solutions that have capabilities to restrict unauthorized modification of backups. So there are some solutions out there that that specifically blocks access to backups by anything other than the backup itself, the backup software itself. Okay, so that's the last control for maturity level 1. I know I'm diving straight into this, so hopefully I'm not going too fast. I appreciate that I am going deep into this because there's quite a few topics I do want to cover. And I've heard we've got a lot of feedback that these are important topics that people want to hear about. Okay. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Now, on control number 7, now we're moving on to maturity levels 2 and 3 only. And as you can probably guess, this is more about ensuring that you have the right access controls for more sophisticated attack in the case where, for example, the attack is on an administrative account or that they've managed to elevate themselves to a privileged account. So control number 7 says that privileged accounts, so excluding backup administrators, cannot access backups belonging to other accounts. So this is, that's all clear. Accounts with administrative access should only be accessed, should only have access to their own backups. So that's what he's saying, right? The concept here of backup administrator was introduced as in the bracket there, and that's equivalent to the backup operator AD security group with Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has always, I guess, recommended that only like a small group of people should be part of this group, not all your administrator. So only this group will have access to backups. Now, the next control really is just taking that further and saying that privileged accounts should be prevented from modifying or deleting backups. So again, this is for maturity level 2 and 3 only. And again, the practical considerations here is to make sure that any compromised privileged accounts cannot delete their own backups. But just as with the unprivileged accounts, with privileged accounts, if they compromise, you don't want them deleting backups. And one way to do this is to secure access to backup applications, as well as, we talk about the access control and making sure that you store the credentials properly. So that we talked about already. One thing in addition to what we talked about earlier already is that you also want to consider using backup solutions that have password locking features. So basically, you only want certain group of people to have access to running the backup application so that they can't change the configurations. And lastly, I mentioned this before, you want to consider using backup solutions that have the ability to restrict unauthorized modification to backups. Okay, so now we're now moving to the realm of maturity level 3 with the last 3 controls. So for the last 3 controls, we're effectively saying, for control number 9 and 10 here, we're effectively saying that no one should have access to backups unless they're backup administrators. So this is in a case where you want to prevent the situation where if somebody is impersonating another user, and in that case, they may have get access to their backups. And remember, your backup is effectively all your data. So they can effectively get access to all the sensitive data that's been backed up. that's inside the backups. So you want to prevent that. No, you really strict access controls and I guess backup encryption are ways to achieve this. Of course, you want to make sure that you have your that only the backup administrators have access to those encryption keys or decryption keys. And lastly, with control number 11, we are talking about preventing even the backup administrators from deleting backups, for modifying deleting backups within their retention period. So if your backups was meant to be kept for 30 days, you shouldn't be able to delete them within that period of time. So the whole point here is that even the backup administrator can be compromised. So you want to stop anyone at all from being able to delete backups. And some practical ways to achieve this is, for example, there's two examples here. One is using immutable storage, so including immutable cloud storage that prevents effectively data deletion within a given period of time. Now, if you think about it, going back to the old days, the old technology, that is a CDR, a DVD-R, you can only write it. You can't rewrite it, for example. Therefore, in that situation, that's the kind of example, it's an old-fashioned example of an immutable storage. Right? So you can't write it again. You can't overwrite it. And if you go even further back, it's like the cassette tapes and the little tabs at the bottom that you break after you record things to prevent re-recording. So that's what that is. Then the other example here I've given here is of how to achieve this is by having separation of duty, and in particular, the people that's responsible for transporting and accessing backups that have taken off sites should be different people, different roles to that of the backup administrator. So in other words, there need to be a formal, I guess, process for a backup administrator to access backups that are off-site, for example. Therefore, prevent them from being able to delete them. So that's there are just two ways to consider on how to achieve this control. Now, we're done with all the controls, but I do want to talk about a bit more about the Essential 8. The Essential 8, as I mentioned before, does have an assessment process. And the assessment process is based on the maturity model you choose. So I mentioned before there were 11 controls for backup, for regular backups, 6 of them affecting all 3 maturity level. And I think 2 of them, 2 additional ones apply to the level 2 and 3, and then 3 apply to level 3 only. So you set your assessment based on the level that you've chosen. So organizations can carry out their own assessment. The actual assessment process is defined, is published, and you can actually go through that. The assessment is focused on the quality of evidence that demonstrate how effective your controls are. And there's actually, vocabulary defined for how effective, how to mark things effectively. So essentially, so you can either mark it as effective, ineffective, alternative control, which means that there's another control that actually covers this, no visibility, not implemented, etc. There's actually a 3-day assessor course. It's a TAFE course designed by the ASD, and it's delivered via the TAFE Cyber. Something that you might want to consider for someone in your organization. And as a very simple example, the kind of question that those assessment can have is request a copy of backups continuity plan to check that the frequency and retention periods of backup have been documented. So this is to make sure that you have done, you can demonstrate that you have done the planning for your backup. Okay, so Essential 8, so with the ACSC also publishes other guides that are quite useful, and each guide they do rate it, for complexity level, whether it's an easy read or it's a moderate or complex. And I'll just go to two backup related examples with the key messages behind them, at least important messages that I think. So there's this one here, which when you do get a copy of these slides, you get the URL to the actual guide. This is a guide that they publish for, I guess, small business IT staff on how they can go about choosing a backup solution for Microsoft 365. Talks about, when choosing a third-party solution, you want to consider that they all meet these, including, I guess, in bold here, that the data, the backup is stored in a local storage device, not elsewhere in the cloud. So they're recommending that if you're doing a backup of your Microsoft 365 cloud data, you don't want to put it in another cloud. Choosing another article here, another guide that they publish is about choosing secure and verifiable technologies, which essentially is about a guide on choosing third-party providers. In that, one of the things it does go through is ensuring that your the sovereignty of backups and storage solutions. So what that means is that you want to know where the final resting place of your data. I did mention this earlier already, but basically you want to make sure that you know where your data are kept, right? In that, what they're saying in that in some situation, your cloud storage may be in one place, but they may archive their own data, so your data, into a different location, which could be a different country altogether, and that might break your data sovereignty requirements for your industry. Okay, so in summary, I do have a few more to go through, so I'll quickly summarize what I've gone through so far. With Essential 8 and backups, so what Essential 8 says that you should be performing and retaining backups in accordance to your business criticality and your business continuity requirements. You should be making sure that your backups are synchronized to a common point in time, that all backups are kept securely and in a resilient manner, that you ensure that the right access are in place for backups to prevent unauthorized access, that you ensure that there is sufficient protection, that you won't have unauthorized modification or deletion during the retention period. And lastly, you want to make sure that you test your backup as part of the disaster recovery exercise. So now I'm going to go through very briefly, introduce you to another framework, which is the NIST CSF, and I'll explain to you why I'm doing that as I go. So we're talking about now the NIST CSF. NIST stands for the National Institute Standards of Technology, and it is a US-based organization. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or CSF short, is like this, same kind of goal. It helps organizations manage and mitigate cybersecurity risks. It is a US based organization, and it was designed really for the US federal agencies, and it's actually mandatory for them to use it and for their suppliers. And therefore, it becomes available for business to use, and of course, it's voluntary otherwise. So it's really mandatory only for the agencies and their suppliers. The CSF is free as well, just like the Essential 8. Unlike things like the ISO 27001, 001, that's not free. So why are we talking about the NIST CSF? The reason we're talking about that is because it is really a lot more mature than the Essential 8, been around longer. It is referenced by a lot of the ACSC publications. So really, you can see that they are looking at that as a starting point. And really, it's being used by a lot of Australian agencies. And in particular, for example, here I put ASIC uses NIST-CFS to assess cyber resilience of the companies that they regulate. So it is quite widely used in Australia. And just this last point here, I just want to give a quick sense of what the difference is between the NIST CSF and the Essential 8. We went through before with the Essential 8, and you saw that really it was about a set of prescriptive controls, right? Exactly the controls that you want to make sure are happening and so forth. Whereas with NIST CSF, it's really more about best practice and guidelines around 5 functions. So identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Now, I won't try to bore you or inundate you with details about all of them, but I'll just give you a quick flavor of what one such example. So, for example, the function protect, the subcategory of that function, this PRDS 11 is about backups of data and are created and are protected, maintained, and tested. And then here's the implementation example below. I won't read through it, but you can at your own time. Now, the other practical publication, the other thing about NIST is that just like the ACSC, they publish a lot of guides that are really useful, that give you a lot of good recommendations. An example here is a guide for MSPs to conduct backups, conduct, maintain, and test backups. The notable recommendation, I'm just going to go through them quickly. Use 3-2-1 backup strategy. So I would assume all of you would have heard what that is. You want to implement diversity in backup media and location. So this is saying that you don't want to back up just to one place or one type of device or one type of media. You want to have different types so that to spread your risk effectively. And it even says that if you're backing up, for example, to external hard drive, make sure you're using different brands and different models and so forth, so that if there is a defect in one, for example, it won't affect all of your disks. So that's what it means by diversity. He also talks about a go back, that you should prepare a go back for data recovery. So the concept of go back is like a virtual back where you have all your like your encryption password, your backup credentials, so all the account credentials to the cloud account credentials, as well as your recovery tool, just the software required to do to carry out the recovery. And basically all these need to be securely stored and ready for deployment in a crisis. And the last recommendation worth pointing out again is that when he talks about cloud storage, that you're aware that you need to be aware on dependencies and limitations. For example, bandwidth and so forth. But importantly, also making sure that you are aware of how it meets the domestic international regulatory compliance. So, for example, we know how in the EU, private data must not leave the EU. So therefore, you need to know where your cloud storage is. Okay, so that's now I'm going to go into the cybersecurity insurance topic. I know that was a very brief introduction. The reason I wanted to give it that flavor is so that you see what other people do, right? In what are the other frameworks out there? An example, and also because you might want to consider it for yourself, given the industry that you're in, or the kind of clients that you serve. Now, with cyber insurance and backups, I'm going to start by giving you a quick trend in Australia. Quick introduction here. So in Australia, the cyber insurance industry is growing around about 20% year on year. According to the Insurance Council of Australia, in the report that's 2 years old, only about 20% of SMEs have taken out cyber insurance. I think at that point was like 35% for larger companies, but that's still quite low. Even now, I would think that's while closer to 30%, it isn't that high. The cost of insurance have been increasing quite a lot year on year. I mean, at one stage was going up, the 50, 80% year on year. But over the last 2 years, it has come down a bit because there's been more competition entering the market. And cyber insurance claims have also been increasing year on year by around about 10%. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go. The cyber insurance sector does have many challenges. Namely, there's very little historical data, and cybercrime has been evolving. So, the pricing of the premiums and I guess really working out risk and so forth for insurer, they need to have data to go with, right? So, there are data that's collected by regulators, but a lot of that is self-reported, right? As we know, there are people who wouldn't want to report data because it might actually affect their reputation. Even with mandatory reporting requirements, a lot of that data is actually not available to insurance. So, for example, with privacy breaches, there is in Australia mandatory reporting requirements, but with those data, the insurers are not able to use. There's actually no minimum underwriting standards yet, and that in part has been blamed for a race to the bottom in the UK with cyber insurance, whereby basically the competition has resulted in laxing of the rules and I guess for writing out cyber insurance. And lastly, and this is what is really related to the topic we're talking about today, there is no uniformity in cybersecurity framework adoption, or as mandated by governments. So really, their insurers are trying to work this out themselves as well. So they don't have a standard to work with. Unlike, for example, there is a international accounting standards that people can then work with, or within Australia, there's an accounting standard that all insurance can work with. Okay, so now let's talk. Sorry, trying to get. Okay, we're talking about assessing risk exposure in cyber insurance. The ICA reports that the current approach of assessing risk exposure is founded on questionnaires that are developed by each insurer. So therefore, that's a very popular topic, common topic, because that's what you get. You get a long list of questions when you try to apply for a cyber insurance. You might have an addendum for ransomware specifically. But what you find is that really they're getting very similar, a lot of the questions, right? And you find that that they are focused around two areas. The first area is the entity or management level controls, right? For example, right, I'm not listing all the questions in in one form, or because I'll take up too much time for that. But a couple examples in this kind of control area is entity or management control area is do you have a chief information security officer? And do you train employees in privacy and security matters? So that's one area. And another area of focus is specific prevention and detection controls, such as do you regularly back up all your sensitive data, and do you mandate multi-factor authentication? So these are the kind of questions they ask. And if you find I will go. I will summarize that a bit later about linking them back to the Essential 8 and others, other frameworks. But I do want to add another note here about on ransomware insurance, because there's a specific area, and you do get specific questionnaires for it. But the important note is that at this stage, cyber insurance do cover ransomware, right? So insurance has specific questionnaire for it. As I mentioned, governments, though, generally condone ransom payment, right? They do not encourage that. That makes sense. And the Australian government has put in a position on that recently as well, following the US, and in basically saying that the government condone ransom payment. Ransom payment, though, if you look at, and they are covered by insurance, but the data is showing that ransom payment only make up a small portion of insurance claim, because actually more of that claim comes from the forensic analysis, the cost involved in forensic analysis, and the cost of business interruption. So the compensation for that. So just some data points to consider. All right, so now I'm just going to talk about cyber insurance and cyber security framework and how they relate. So I mentioned before there are many cyber security framework, and there is no adoption uniformity. So we have NIST, we have the ISO 27001, we have Cyber Essential, which is the UK version of the framework. We have Essential 8. We actually have some other, the ISM as well, another Australian framework. So there's many, right? The important thing to note, though, is that they are complementary. So knowing one will get you a long way with the others. And specifically when it comes to backups, they are very similar, right? The requirements are very similar. But they are not exactly the same, which is why I mentioned before there are issues in the cyber insurance industry which frustrates the insurers. And specifically about Essential 8 here, while I did mention that Essential 8 is really more a prescriptive list of mitigation strategies, even though it's really that, what you can do is map each one of your insurance form questions to one of the strategies or one of the controls in the strategies, either explicitly or implicitly. And the other point to note is the insurers do use your response to determine your organization cybersecurity posture, and therefore, which basically would broadly reflect your Essential 8 maturity level. So it isn't a one-to-one relationship, but if you do follow the Essential 8, or you do go through the controls and check against those controls, you will find that you can answer your cyber insurance question quite easily, because you will know effectively, because you will know where you are with the controls of the Essential 8. So I'm going to just quickly give you a sample of the questionnaire that are backup related for the cyber insurance. So there are questions around handling sensitive data. For example, do you classify your data based on sensitivity? Do you encrypt your personal data, including inside backups? With incident response and management, do you regularly back up all sensitive and critical data, and are backups stored in media which is disconnected from the network? So is it offline, and is it offsite, right? And do you have a cyber incident response or business continuity and disaster recovery plan? Again, these are kind of questions that, if you think back what we talked about before in the cyber, the Essential 8 regular backup strategy, the controls there, you can see how they map. How long does it take to restore your critical revenue generating systems? Another question. And then with supply management, you want to make sure that you want to ask, are all suppliers required to comply with your cybersecurity policy? And do you have a process in place to manage termination of supply contracts? Which some of these other questions were part of the other publications. In fact, they are part of the actual some of the cybersecurity framework, perhaps not directly Essential 8, but you'll find that a lot of these are, as I said, implied rather than explicitly mapped. So as I said, you can clearly see the links between these questions and the cybersecurity framework that we presented earlier. Okay, so just a bit more commentary about the questions I presented earlier. One of the things that we talked about is a lot is business continuity is an important consideration. And as per the recent CrowdStrike incident, now in that case, the remedial steps came out very quickly within hours, right? But that might not be the case in the future. For example, there could be a situation that could take days before you get a patch or a fix or steps to fix the situation. So really, you want to have taken steps to use your backups for business continuity. So I did mention earlier that some backup solutions you can have the ability to effectively boot from your backups, so you can get up and going quickly. So you can, for example, boot from a backup that does not have that problematic update. Another point to consider is that there's a general acceptance that offline and offsite backups are the most effective way to protect your physical and from physical and cyber-related incidents. Now, of course, we do know that this is becoming off-site and offline backups. So physically offline backups is being seen as more and more a hassle to achieve. But you can see that even the insurance question, as well as all the different frameworks, are recommending that as the most secure way, or at least you have to have some form of that. So that's not necessarily the only backup you have to have, but you should have some form of offline and offsite backup. And the other thing that's been mentioned quite a bit is about vendors' risk. So having to manage that carefully. For example, there are limitations on how much liability they have. CrowdStrike, for example, they may only be liable, and I know that's still in questions, but they may only be liable for the subscription, right? That you pay for them, not the actual financial loss that's caused during the outages or the blue screen period. And the other thing that's mentioned a lot is about avoiding vendor lock-in to minimize the cost involved in terminating a supplier. So you don't want to be so locked in that effectively it becomes too costly to move anywhere, and you're potentially paying a much higher price regularly because you don't want to go through the process of moving from that supplier because it's too costly. Okay, so I know I'm just getting to the end here. In quick summary of the cyber insurance topic, cyber insurance company utilize questionnaires to assess each applicant's level of risk and hence their premium. Right? As I mentioned, the industry is still maturing. If there are a lot of challenges still in play, especially around lack of data and uniformity. But what we do know is applying any cybersecurity framework, including the Essential 8, would help mitigate risk and including the implementation of regular backups. Okay, so now I'm just in closing, one last slide. In closing, the Essential 8 and NIST CSF are a valuable framework that provides specific cybersecurity controls and best practice guides. And putting this framework into practice will help mitigate your risk, as well as help lower your cyber insurance premium. Now, I haven't really talked about BackupAssist, but at BackupAssist, we actually have made many product design decisions in response to the framework requirements that have been evolving over the last decade. And I guess one thing to notice that we were actually the first to market with the ability to protect backups. As I mentioned before, there's quite a few out there now that have that capability, but we were first to market with it. And we look forward to demonstrating BackupAssist in an upcoming product webinar with you as well. So I know there's only 7 minutes left, but we are open to questions and also be interested to hear from you what you think of the Essential 8, because the question about whether it's really made a difference or not, we'd love to hear from what you think, because in many ways it's relatively new and relative is the word, but has had time enough out there to really know. We'd like to hear from you, and as well as any questions or any queries that you have. So, Alison, I have finished my presentation.
Perfect. So, does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask while we're here? You can just unmute yourself and talk. No question. That means you've explained it quite well, Wilson. So we really appreciate that. It really does give us a better understanding of what's available as resources for our resellers. And I think, the homework for everyone on this call today will be to really have a look at those Essential 8 frameworks and NIFTS frameworks and see if you can come up with some sort of strategy that you can enforce on your clients as a baseline. At least, would you say, Wilson, have some sort of a baseline that you would apply to all your customers, maybe just even trying to get to that maturity level 1, and then from there at least understand what that involves. So we will send a recording of this, because there was quite a lot of very informative information in there for us all. We'll send the recording, we'll send those links that you've provided as resources for you all. And we would also like to let you know, like Wilson mentioned, we will be doing another webinar where we'll be a little bit more product focused for those that are interested in finding out a little bit more about BackupAssist and what backup we have available through them. And the things like Wilson was saying, they've got their crypto safeguard and black boxes available as additional features, backups to cloud, backups of your 365 tenants. A lot of our resellers are asking more and more about that. So we do have a solution for that if you're interested. But thank you all for your time today, and we hope that you'll join us for our next webinar. Thank you so much, Wilson. That was great.
Thank you, everyone.